Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
I'm a fan of classic movies.
Hello and welcome to Overlapping Dialogue, a podcast of double features dedicated to programming the finest, most eclectic, and downright bizarre film pairings and cataloging the discussions that ensue. We're your gruesome twosome, Kyle and Levi Huffman. I'm Kyle.
I'm Levi.
And here we are for episode 69. Again, it's hard to believe we're already near the end of our first 10 double features we've been programming, which of course is our new format. This week, we're going back in ye old silent cinema days to tackle Cabiria from 1914 and Steamboat Bill Jr. from 1928. Which we'll go ahead and tell you, this is probably not going to be one of the longer episodes we've ever recorded. Not quite maybe as short as the the episode we did of American Psycho and Wedding Crashers.
Yeah, easily could be shorter than that, though.
Well, we didn't even have a Blue Plate special on anything for that.
Also, then, it probably will be, yeah.
So, we do have, before we get into the Blue Plate special, Oscar nominations, Levi. Do you care?
No, I haven't even really looked at them.
So those dropped earlier this week. Yeah. Again, I used to watch the Oscars every year. Yeah. Really, since or even before COVID, I kind of stopped watching, anyways, because my tastes, were more and more out of line with those. So if you're coming to hope to hear about those this week, sorry, but
I literally mean nothing to me.
Again,
I'm not even saying that to posture.
Yeah.
Like, I literally didn't pay any attention to it. I was barely on Twitter that day.
Yeah.
Anyway, so no.
I will say it is continually surprising to me that Everything Everywhere All at Once, a movie that I really loved, got as many nominations as it did. I mean, I know it's been winning awards throughout the year, various little awards, but that seems to be, I wouldn't say quite the little movie that could, because it's got Michelle Yeoh and all the trauma queen herself. Jason Lee. Jamie Lee Curtis. And so, I mean, it's got some stars in it, but I mean, as far as what the subject matter of the movie is and its popularity has frankly been a welcome surprise to me, even though the discourse around it's kind of become increasingly fraught and headache-inducing, even though I really still love the movie. Also, but if you're here to
can I say briefly,
go ahead.
Because we're going to talk about a movie kind of related to this in a little while. With Crimes of the Future, I saw some people tweeted, and I assume this was being genuine. I don't know, because then
I think it was partially a joke, because there's been a recurring joke.
The only reason that I thought it was real was because of who tweeted it. It seemed like just a very basic film news Twitter, and so I thought that's just what it was.
Yeah.
But about why was Crimes of the Future not nominated, a lot of people asking us. It's probably because it's not very good. So
that sometimes that's the way it works,
right? But
it turns out,
I don't know.
Yeah, we weren't really big fans of that. But another thing we could talk about very briefly before we get into Blue Plate Special: the Dallas Cowboys yet again lost in the divisional round of the NFC playoffs against San Francisco 49ers. But again, all the Cowboys fans said this was their year. This was the year. They've got to win this year. Didn't happen, as it turns out.
As it doesn't every year.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was it was like Christmas again.
Yeah.
Very fun to watch. Just a wonderful experience.
I mean, the whole last play is something that's already been made fun of ad nauseum.
I mean,
how questionable that was. I don't have no clue what the play design was.
Who are you overall pulling for at this point?
I would like to see San Francisco win.
They're probably going to get beat by the Eagles.
It's strange to say this. Like, I really wouldn't mind any of the teams to win. There's none of the teams that I really hate. Now, I historically have not really liked the Philadelphia Eagles.
They haven't been quite as annoying the past so many years.
It seems like they're in a little bit of a different era than they were in past eras as far as the fan base and even the players themselves. So, you know... And
they're not at the top of my S list, more or less, is the way I could say it.
But again, the Final Four, which again they're going to be playing tomorrow, you'll already know the results.
You already know who's going to be in the Super Bowl. You won't have seen the Super Bowl yet, but no one will have.
Maybe you will have, and you're just listening to this after the fact.
Yeah, maybe you're listening to this in 30 years. I don't know.
But again, the Chiefs, you know, I don't really love the Chiefs. I don't adamantly dislike them either, though. I mean, you know, I don't want them Andy to win. And I'm gonna Mahomes, be clear on that. I mean, I'm not rooting for them to win, but I'm saying if they were to, that wouldn't really bother me. You know, Cincinnati, they had a struggling start to the season after, of course, being in the Super Bowl and losing last year. Seemed like they've really came back strong. Joe Burrow seems like a fairly likable enough guy, so wouldn't mind to see them win. Again, San Francisco is like among the top 10 teams, I would say I might root for in a given game. So, you know, they would be the one I'd like to most see, and I know some San Francisco fans, I'd be happy for them. So again, you know, it really wouldn't matter to me. Again, the Cowboys lost, so that was the most important thing, really.
Yeah.
This playoff round. But we're not here to talk football. We're here to talk cinema. So, you know, here we go. Pull up a chair. Put that bib on your neck. It's time for the Blue Plate Special.
Hi, Audrey.
Norma, have a cup of coffee, please?
Sure.
I'll have what she's having.
The bib is the only way to protect your neck when you're right here.
Wow. Supercharged edition.
Yeah.
So we got two movies to talk about. They could make for an interesting little double feature in of themselves.
Yeah.
Actually, the second one, I've actually got a genuine one that I think it could work with. It was also a more recent movie. The Crow, though, that'd be a good, you know, podcast name. The Crow from 1994. This movie very infamously starred Brandon Lee, who was, of course, unfortunately and tragically killed in the production and making of the movie, who's, of course, Bruce Lee's son.
Who himself died at a very young age, too.
Yeah, and so there's a kind of a sad tragedy of rhyming of something in regards to that. But this is one of those movies that, you know, has an almost legendary status at this point. And I feel like so much of the conversation around the movie, at least what I had heard, was so much focused around Lee himself and sometimes less the cinema of the movie, which is understandable because, I mean, anything that, you know, as valuable as cinema is, it's never as valuable as a single individual human being's life. So it's very sad that, you know, obviously he died and was kind of robbed of becoming, you know, a star, frankly, on par with his father. Because, I mean, what we see of him in this, I was pretty impressed with as far as a leading man. Of kind of
I mean, it's not the most complex character. And I said this in my pretty short review. I'm starting to write shorter reviews again just because I don't have time in my life to do that all the time. But I kind of said that, you know, the character itself doesn't really do him any favors, so it isn't necessarily him as much as it's the character. I think he's really good action star, though.
Yeah. And, I mean, you could imagine a alternate version of the 90s where he was a pretty big draw, you know, and this acts as I think a good little debut in a big way for him. Just to read you briefly what The Crow's about, of course, it stars Brandon Lee, his final film appearance is Eric Dreven, a murdered musician who is resurrected to avenge his death and that of his fiancée. So it's based on a comic book, I believe.
James O. Barr.
Yeah, The Crow. And so, I mean, it's very 90s. It's also directed by Alex Proyas. what about, like, for you going into it, like, was the reputation of the movie, and then what did the results of seeing the movie itself,
Well,
how do they maybe differ or
I know that
contrast with
people kind of like the movie. I know people are big fans of Dark City in particular, which I haven't, another Alex Proyas film, but I honestly didn't know exactly what people thought of the movie, because the whole thing about the movie is that Brandon Lee died, and that's what
I think
I've
also the
always
soundtrack has a
known about it.
semi-legendary status, too.
Yeah, it's having a lot of industrial rock, and best song in it is The Cure, obviously, but a song by The Cure, not a song called The Cure. I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
But that, yeah, I mean, I always have known its reputation as being about that, so I wasn't really sure what people thought of the movie exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, literally from the beginning, it's just a really amazing action movie, especially for a superhero movie at the time, because that's what I kind of liked about it, is it was a superhero movie like Batman, say, where it has this kind of whole world that it builds,
Gothic
and it's
kind of
very
world,
very much reminded me of Batman '89. It feels like it's taken a lot from that as far as, but this is Detroit,
production design,
actually in Detroit explicitly.
Yeah.
But that it also was like an action movie, unlike what some of these types of movies are, and there's a lot of those kind of revenge superhero stories of the '90s, like Spawn or this. And so that's kind of a whole weird that's a whole dark age of comics kind of idea. But I really like this a lot, and honestly would have loved it even more if it hadn't have resulted in the way it did. You know, that, because that doesn't necessarily, I wouldn't say that doesn't affect the movie, but inherently the movie caused the death of a human being, so, you know, that's all very complicated, but easy enough to say just, I would have loved even more if it wouldn't have been for that, which I think is clear.
Yeah,
but,
and as you said, it takes it. You know, it's rooted in the context of the '90s of a lot of those superheroes / like pulp hero adaptations that were happening.
Yeah,
you know, obviously Batman '89 was kind of, obviously that was a huge studio release, big studio movie, but then that kind of resulted in that wave of a lot of those, whether it be The Spirit,
or those just
Dark
more
Man,
comic booky versions of it too,
the
like
Rocketeer,
the Rocketeer or the Phantom or whatever.
Yeah, and there's a lot of those that are okay to find. Some are downright mediocre to bad. This really just kind of stands in stark contrast, I think, in large part because it takes the style and the atmosphere that '89 was in Returns, Batman Returns, were so present with, and goes in a more explicitly R-rated direction. It's not like pulling any punches, really. I mean,
no,
it's a pretty explicit.
It feels like an
movie.
R-rated action movie of the time that happens to be that, because that's what's so funny is you've got everything else going on in the movie, and then you got Michael Wincott, who just continues to bat 1,000 all the time. Literally, it's like he's just one of my favorite actors in general at this point, because like everything he ever does is amazing. It's just like what all these question marks about, but as Top Dollar, literally, which we were laughing at for unrelated reasons that I won't go into.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, it feels like, and also because this was just before Strange Days too, so it feels a lot like that. Also, which he was also in, and also the villain in, or one of the villains anyway, because there's a lot of villains.
I had no idea
Days,
David Patrick Kelly was in this.
Yeah,
too,
this
Steve
also
Bird.
reminded me of the Warriors a lot too, because of the urban setting, and he was in that.
Yeah,
and so that was another movie that it reminded me of, is that kind of Walter Hill type productions too.
I thought Ernie Woods was pretty good in the movie too.
Yeah,
I mean, he doesn't Ernie Hudson,
yeah.
excuse me, was really good in the movie. He's like a cop who's
and you don't normally get those kind of performances in those movies, at least at this point. Like, there's like a proto version of Jim Gordon in like the Batman now or something, because like back then, I mean, you literally had like you know, Pat Hingle, love him to death, but pretty awful Jim Gordon. Like, not even him, just the way he's always written is just as a total
it's
joke.
kind of sad that we didn't get a good Jim Gordon until Gary Oldman.
Yeah, I mean, and so like the performances like that were actually pretty rare at the time to get something like that, and then so he's really good in the movie too, I thought. And then they had that guy that was the cop, his like boss, that easily could have been that McGinty, what's his name? That guy that's in like every movie and is that total a-hole. He's in Point Break.
Marco Rodriguez, maybe?
Well, yeah, that's the guy in this, but I'm saying there's that guy that's in like every movie in that time period and is like an a-hole. Let me find No, not Point Blank. Point Break. Hang on. You'll know him when you see him here. Yeah, John C. McGinley. This guy.
Yeah.
That's always a jerk and everything. Is like he could easily have been played by that guy, but wasn't. But yeah, so like that. Some of that stuff's kind of whatever. That almost honestly, it's weird because he feels kind of like he serves the purpose of Vicky Vale in a weird way.
Yeah, right.
Because he's like going after this murder that no one believes is supernatural, whereas Vicky Vale's going after Batman, and everybody thinks, oh, that's kind of, it's like a weird version of that, but like a male cop. Like, so that's kind of interesting. What did you think of the whole subplot with the girl in it?
I actually thought I was actually pretty interested in that.
Yeah.
I kind of frankly wish that would have, it would have been more interesting, and it seemed like early on that the story would have been told really more through her eyes and her perspective, but it kind of strayed away from that as the movie went along.
Yeah.
I thought that was a pretty strong aspect to the movie because you could look at the stuff with the main, character,
Eric
Draven or the Crow. And as you said, I mean, I think it's visually well done and he has a great presence, but like, after a point, it becomes pretty one note. I'm just trying to get revenge, and it's like I think to channel a lot of the humanism of the movie through the girl was actually was good to the extent to which they did it, but they should have done that even more.
Yeah, because I think that there's parts of that too where they try to make him more of a hero. Where like it's one of the best scenes in the movie actually. So I don't want to talk too bad about it, but that girl's mother is like a heroin addict or morphine addict or whatever, and so she doesn't really take care of her, and that's why she was like basically living with Draven and his fiance at the time. And there's that scene where literally he goes in there and like basically holds her arm, and it's like a really interesting effect where the morphine literally like pours out of her like tracks on her arm, and that was just like a moment. Honestly, my mouth opened a little bit. I was like, I've never seen anything like that in a movie. That's weird. But that's a really good. That's a really good scene.
Yeah.
But there are sections of that movie that are like, oh, we have to make him a hero now, and it's kind of like because they also, I love it, but like the whole Michael Wincott character is to say, oh, but there's a big bad at the end of this who technically did not kill him, but oh, he's going to go after him because he's evil. And it's kind of just a weird kind of like, oh, okay, like...
And, there was a lot of people back when the original Tim Burton Batman movie came out that criticized the decision to have the Joker be the one who killed Batman's parents. And as far as the, quote, realism of any of that, and the realism of a man dressed up as a bat fighting crime anyways is obviously in question. But there was this operatic, like, straight line to hero and villain that felt very... united in that way,
like
and
very operatic, very Greco-Roman.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it fits that movie and what the movie's going for. Again, with this, it kind of was like, oh, so David Patrick Kelly's T-Bird is really the bad guy, right? But actually, he's got so that while I love Michael Wincott's presence in the movie, it did kind of feel like,
his hair in this too.
Long, very long hair, and which also he had in Strange Days too.
What's the whole deal also with like they literally eat people's eyeballs or something? Yeah, like what? I don't know about that. This doesn't make any sense. Like they'll literally basically kidnap prostitutes and like take their eyes because they're a wise guy, as Joe Pesci would have once said.
Yeah.
But anyway, so like some things in the movie feel kind of tacked on for a movie that's already not that long.
Yeah.
Now, part of this might have been because of his death, and I think they got most of the movie filmed though. There wasn't a whole lot left with him anyway. But still, there's some things about the movie that feel a little incomplete or a little bit much. But
again, it goes back to, and the same can be said of aspects of Tim Burton's Batman movies. But the atmosphere is so rich. I mean, it just visually just kind of stunning. And people, of course, we do too. And I don't want to go into all this, criticize modern superhero movies all the time of how plastic, cheap CGI they look. And I mean, it rings true even more though when you go back and watch these movies of this era, because it's like all these physical sets, all the like. Again, you feel like you're in a comic book world. You feel like you're not in a realistic world. And it's not that it always
has to be dark either, because you have movies like Superman or even Dick Tracy, which is a terrible movie, but like...
we'll probably do one day on here.
But the Art Deco design of these movies like this, or even The Rocketeer, which I haven't seen, but like the opposite of the Gothic, they're very pop and big and like... and grandiose urban environments that still are like, they're a thing. They're tangible.
Visually imaginative.
Like, and so, you literally see these other movies, and it's just like, oh, it's just Atlanta. Literally, it's like, okay, like, whatever.
So, again, well...
Or it's Chicago, in the case of, like, even The Dark Knight, which is a great movie, but it's like, it's literally just Chicago, like, whatever.
As Levi said, we've not seen really much else from Alex Proyas, but we do actually have the Dark City Blu-ray, so we'll be watching that soon and probably be talking about this soon on here. Any other last thoughts on the
No, I just really... It's like one of my more favorite movies I've actually seen in a while, and I was kind of surprised at how much I liked it, because I went in very guarded, because I was like, what happened with this movie is just a total tragedy, and I don't know that it can even live up to what it's supposed to, but thankfully his performance wasn't just sympathetically good, it actually just was good, so that made it go a long way too, I think. It was actually worth something. It wasn't just like, nothing is worth someone dying, obviously, but it wasn't totally a waste. Like,
I agree.
So,
and again, if you're interested in movies of this era, and again, this like all these superhero or pulp,
this is one of the better ones, especially
kind of
for
movies,
that. Yeah,
I would say check this out,
especially because I've seen parts of Spawn on TV, which I'm interested in at least. But like, this is nothing. That's nothing compared to this. I can already tell. So
check out The Crow. We watched the Blu-ray, the transfer.
You ever want to have fun? Try and find Spawn on the HBO Spanish channel and see Martin Sheen speaking Spanish as the villain. In that movie.
I've seen that,
Which is funny because he himself can speak Spanish, so it's like...
Another thing, too, a random other aspect that we enjoy about The Crow is just watching the like, we had the Blu-ray, all the, like, late 2000s, like, ads for all these random things. I don't even remember what they all were, but it was just like...
So this wasn't on there, but crap like Salt and, like, whatever, but,
As far as new releases go, this is I'm kind of surprised and kind of not. It makes sense why this was allowed to play in Hickory. Infinity Pool, the newest Brandon Cronenberg film, who's of course the son of David Cronenberg. I'll read the kind of... You know what's funny is, like, I remember seeing the trailer for this, and I still didn't even totally know what this was even about going in, and that for me enriched the experience. But I'll just read you what the IMDb says about it here. James and M. Foster are enjoying an all-inclusive beach vacation in the fictional island of Latolka. Was that what they called it? Latolka? Yeah. When a fatal accident exposes the resort's perverse subculture of hedonistic tourism, reckless violence, and surreal horrors. Now, again, this is Brandon Cronenberg. I've not seen anything else from him. He made that movie
I have the Blu-ray of Possessor.
Yeah.
Which, can I tell my story about that real quick? Because it was a daggum hoot. All right. So, I go to buy Possessor. I remember this was like...
At Walmart?
The beginning of summer of 2021. So, this has been like a year and a half ago. Or getting closer to just 2 years ago at this point. And I buy the thing. If the Blu-ray itself has been stolen out of it, I didn't even know that until after I'd bought it because it was in the like case thing. I hate those stupid. Why do you even put the protectors on these things? I don't know. They're stupid. That's why I got screwed because it wasn't there. So I go through all this effort. I have to go take it back. They don't have another one, so I give it to them. They give me the money on a card. I buy it online and get it shipped to me. Have still yet to watch it. It's been that long.
Well, that whole experience would naturally just kind of make you go, well, whatever.
I want to see
or not make it a priority.
Yeah, but we kept kind of wanting to do it and putting off, and this came out, and I was like, well, we don't have time now to go do it or to do it. So this was our first from him.
Yeah.
But anyway.
So I'm a big fan of David Cronenberg. Just, again, I mean, he's his own filmmaker, but there are connections to be made, I think, between David and Brandon.
Are they related?
Yeah, they're brother and
father. What?
But I'm a fan of David Cronenberg's work. It's grown on me over the years like a fungus, which is appropriate for his body horror kind of thing. But I was like, again, I went into this with an open mind, thinking, I don't really know what this is going to be. Let's just see. I actually quite like this movie. I don't know if I exactly said I'd love it. But it kind of, with a genre movie, this is kind of and to talk about what even genre this is for a second. I mean, I think the most direct line would be, well, it's horror, thriller, sci-fi, satire. I mean, it's like it's really all those things kind of combined in a blender. And I love anything that can kind of take certain specific genres and kind of mishmash them together, which is something David Cronenberg himself does often. But Brandon Cronenberg's film was one that I never truly knew what the next move it was going to make, and I didn't love every move it made, but I was always like, oh, okay, we're doing this now. And so I quite liked the movie, and it actually made me think a little bit more and larger about the stardom of Alexander Skarsgård, who's, of course, the lead. It seems like more than any other like male actor I can think of over the last 10, 15 years, how interested he is to be kind of the avatar for deconstructions of masculinity.
He's a lot like James Spader, honestly, of being in Sex, Lies, and Videotape and Crash, of course, and even that one movie that was real controversial. It had Maggie Gyllenhaal in it or whatever. I don't remember what that's called, but anyway, I know that was a big deal. It was like a erotic thriller movie or whatever.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of reminds me of that.
But I think a lot about his performance in Big Little Lies and how Secretary was the name of that movie. That how like kind of how willing he was to put himself out there to kind of be this display of toxic masculinity. And I wouldn't say his character in this isn't exactly toxic masculinity, but it is this kind of self-defeated, man who feels like he's not really worthy exactly of his wife, and he's looking to kind of build this identity outside of his relationship to her. He's like this failed novelist who's looking for inspiration for his next book, and happens, quote, to run into Mia Goth's character and her French husband, and madcap hijinks ensue. Levi, what did you think of this movie writ large?
Well, it's first of all should be said, I'm not exactly a David Cronenberg fan. I've never totally disliked any of his movies. Scanners and Videodrome I was probably turned off by the most, and yet I would go back and watch those and probably like them more. I'd probably like Scanners more than Videodrome.
I do kind of generally shrug at The Fly.
But I don't care about that either way. It's kind of whatever.
Dead
Zone
Crash.
Was all right. I love Crash. I think Crash is really good, and that's like his best thing by far. And I think a really interesting, really like engagingly disgusting movie in a lot of ways, and I think it's very fascinating. And I want to watch a lot more of his movies in general, especially his oldest stuff is like expressly Canadian work, like Rabid or.
And we've not really seen History of Violence or Eastern Promises, which I figured we'd actually probably pretty much like. But I do I've always really. I know we're talking about his dad here now, but I really respect David Cronenberg's interest in adapting literary works. Particularly, he adapted Don DeLillo, of course.
J.G. Ballard,
Stephen King. I think he's and even Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Well, even
or not Edgar Rice Burroughs. Naked Lunch.
William Burroughs.
William Burroughs, excuse me. Very different. Yeah. William Burroughs with Naked Lunch.
Well, and then even also I know Josh Olson wrote the screenplay, but I know that History of Violence is an adaptation of a comic book, even a graphic novel. So
But this again, this is his son. I mean, I don't want to talk too much about the dad here, but. It feels to me like kind of a trashy, can't put it down paperback thriller in its own way too.
Right.
This does.
Yeah. So I've never been the biggest fan of David Cronenberg. He's somebody that I like, but have never been. You're way more of a fan than I am.
I did not really like Crimes of the Future all that much.
That was just a joke.
Yeah.
Probably like the biggest joke of a 3-star movie I've ever seen.
Yeah, it wasn't really bad.
I was like,
it actually did have interesting ideas in it. We probably talked about this way back when. I don't remember. It had enough good ideas in it where you're like, okay, sure, but I don't even think about it all that much. Really, it was very easy to throw 3 stars its way and just go whatever and forget about it.
Yeah. But this clearly is something else too. But there is a big part of this that is Cronenberg.
What's exciting about it is it does feel like the evolution or the next step of the DNA of what those movies were. Literally manifest in his son being manifested cinematically.
It felt
too.
a lot like Seconds, which obviously we've done a whole podcast on. I'm a big fan of.
Yeah, as is
far
Alec
as-
Baldwin.
Because we haven't said actually, we haven't said, well, don't even go there. No, you mustn't go there. We haven't even talked about what the kind of thing of the movie is essentially Alexander Skarsgård's character runs someone down and kills them, and then it's all about you can either be executed or you can pay a bunch of money for us to make a body double of you to execute, and you have to watch it.
Right.
And then the movie becomes all about people that's happened to, and they're obsessed with staying there and watching this happen. But something,
and then a question also happening: Is it really the original
the new
him
version of them? Every time that happens, is it the real one that they kill? I actually think it probably is. That just seems natural.
No, it's just
enough,
an interesting little wrinkle.
that they're like, oh no, we did actually execute you, but there's another version of you that has the consciousness of you. But the point of the movie is that obviously they lose their humanity by doing those things anyway, and so it's ultimately it's an even worse than just being executed almost. Is that it's like, no, because I knew there was going to be some Twilight Zone, Tales from the Crypt-esque kind of like morality to it. That it was like, no, you should have just died for what you did.
Right,
but now you
it's
have
obviously
lost
also
your mind. Also,
as I said earlier, it's a satire of the rich and elite.
Well,
that they can get away consequence free of all these various
doing
crimes
that, and even just goes all the way back to the idea of like rich people paying for people to go in their place in the American Civil War or whatever.
Or throughout history,
or just throughout history of you need to do this. Well, I'll pay for somebody else to die for me or whatever. And so. Yeah, and also just that obsession with death. It's a very DeLillo-esque idea in that, too, I think, about watching your own death. It seems very, DeLillo, as far as we talked about White Noise recently, so go listen to that. But yeah, so it has a lot of very potent ideas, which I think saves it from just being a totally pretentious, albeit sometimes thrilling thriller, but it's... I mean, it engages in a lot of stuff that, like, I remember there were points where they were having those, like, drug orgies or whatever, and I literally looked over at you and then, like, looked at my watch and tapped it, like, are we going to be done with this soon? Like, I just tire
it's not something
of
I know this isn't what you're saying, but the prudes on film Twitter might not like it.
That's not why. It just keeps going on and on. It just becomes repetitive and ridiculous. I could care less about the nudity or the violence. Like, that doesn't mean anything to me. I'm just talking about, all right, like, I get it. These people are on drugs, yes. But no,
I don't think those sequences go on as long as they make you feel like
no, they don't.
They're
not that frequent. I mean, but in the moment, I'm just like, okay.
Yeah.
But, I don't know. I mean, I think you're right that sometimes a lot of weird things happen in the movie you don't totally expect. Like, I wasn't expecting that they were going to bring a version of him in as the cop.
Yeah.
And actually there's certain things like that surprised me, but overall I found it to be a pretty rote movie in a lot of ways that's like a lot of these movies we continue to talk about of the post-horror movie and that kind of pretentiousness, but then again there's so many of these movies now that I wonder, it's like, what can we do to not make that happen anymore? I don't know. Where it's
this felt genuinely more transgressive than most of those movies
it clearly is. It felt to me even more transgressive than Crimes of the Future, just by nature of that was weird in a body horror sense, like his movies normally are. Like,
that whole movie felt way more to me like an intellectual exercise than it was something that really made you, quote, feel something. This was more about, like, we'll intellectualize a little bit, but let's just give you the sensations and feelings
and part
of this, which is inherently more cinematic.
Yeah, and part of that is just that whole idea that now he's an artist now, David Cronenberg, and he makes movies that are more intentionally art house and movies,
didactic,
that are not as much as horror or genre movies anymore. His son is clearly not doing that. He clearly still is young and wants to engage in those things. So I think that's the major difference, obviously, between the newer work of Cronenberg and of David Cronenberg and his son, is that they're making something different.
This would be a chance.
I am also not really a fan of Mia Goth, so I think that's part of the movie is.
She has really kind of came on in a big way by
yeah.
taking the world by storm in recent years. I think, in 2022 she was in both X, which I saw and liked, and Pearl, which I've not yet seen, but seems to have gotten an even larger following than X did. So I like X, haven't seen Pearl. I remember her also from A Cure for Wellness.
Yeah.
She has a very... She's also in Suspiria. I forgot that.
Yeah, I could see that. All the weird.
She's also
in
one
that.
of Nymphomaniac.
I remember her from that
movies.
Most. Yeah.
She
don't
has,
like those movies.
She has such a very distinct film presence, screen presence, that even when she plays, and she mostly is playing pretty unlikable.
It got a little ways into the movie, and
characters.
I realized she didn't have eyebrows, and I was like,
yeah.
Just kind of like didn't really know what to think of that, but
like she has a really interesting way of like, I think inflicting upon audiences at once sexiness and contempt. She just has a very interesting like voice and cadence, and again makes a lot of unpredictable acting decisions.
Giallo femme fatale in a lot of ways. I think that fits the genre movie she's in. Yeah, I mean,
and in some of these movies, like A Cure for Wellness, biggest extent, which was a movie I think a lot of, she's kind of a damsel in distress. In these more recent movies, she's become, if not the villain, an active antagonist in many ways to the movie. And in this, she drives a wedge between herself and between Skarsgård and Skarsgård's wife.
Yeah, and she seems clearly like genuinely insane and conniving, whereas the other people just seem to be going along with what she wants to do.
Yeah, she's kind of in a roundabout way running the show of all these hedonists.
Yeah, they're just a lot more basic and
I mean, not to spoil too much, but there's like one of the more climactic aspects towards the end of the movie is. Where like she's like in a car having stopped a bus as like trying to basically hold the bus hostage to get him out, and just like
there's a whole thing on
she's
Twitter.
like calling him Jonesy, and the way she says it and just like pointing the gun, it's just so gets under your skin, and you're like, I want this character to die or something horrific to happen. And spoiler alert, ever so briefly, it never does really with her, and I think that's kind of the point, is in many ways, and part of like I really actually liked the ending of the movie, where really not all that much changed or happened. There were no real consequences.
It's the idea that these things
they just
continue.
left, and then I mean, it's one of those things like it could be semi eye roll inducing, but to say just what the end of the movie is, so skip ahead a little bit if you don't want to see it or hear it. Like where he's just sitting alone, and there's just all that rain coming down, and he doesn't leave, he stays there. I think that's actually a great image and poetic
because it's not actually
to the movie.
Literally happening even because he leaves. But that's like a whole metaphor. I think that is it's kind of pretentious, but I thought it was kind of interesting. Also, I mean, and what do you think of the whole thing of the masks in the movie? Because that seems like the most David Cronenberg thing.
That is one of the more eye roll inducing. Like, oh, they want to play a part, and they want to, it's like in its own way, it's like Eyes Wide Shut, The Next Generation. It's like, ooh, this secret hidden world, and they want to hide themselves in that world, and yada, yada, yada. That is one of those things that it adds a visual dimension to the movie, especially in the hallucinogenic sequences with those. And so I kind of think visually, aesthetically, it makes some sense, but it is one of those things that you could easily just go, okay, we all wear masks, metaphorically speaking, as Ben Stein once said in The Mask. That is something I'll be like, okay, yeah, whatever. Like, I get it. I get what you're going for there.
I'm no Ben Stein fan, but his greatest moment of acting ever is when Jim Carrey puts the mask on and Ben Stein's just like looking at him like literally dead. That's like what makes me laugh the most in that scene, because you see all that happening and then it cuts to him and he's like, I think you're under a great deal of stress. It's not like some real basic like you need to quit acting up, like basically. But so it's just a fine movie. I mean, it didn't wow me particularly, but it could have easily been worse also, I think, and so it's very inspired. I mean, I think that it.
I mean, I think it shows promise from him as somebody to watch, other than obviously again being the son of
because
David
I know we're
Cronenberg,
comparing it a lot to Crimes of the Future because that just recently
that was
came
a
out,
recent movie from
but also it looks a lot like that movie does too because they were both filmed in like vaguely Mediterranean or Eastern Europe. I don't really know, but that with that movie it was just like him, like Viggo Mortensen lounging in like black robes, just very like what, and being fed by these weird like thing. This just feels like this is a horror or thriller movie with some disgusting crap going on, and it's like very much more authentic to me than.
So again, I liked it a little better than Levi, but again, I would encourage you if you're interested in horror thrillers or Cronenberg-esque cinema. Obviously, check this out. We can talk a little bit briefly. Last thing here, the crowd we were with.
Yeah,
one of the most randomly packed. We saw it on Thursday night, like randomly packed crowds in a smaller screening room at the AMC in Hickory. No walkouts, which is I'm a little shocked by. What did you think of that experience of just the crowd we were with? There wasn't a lot of big reactions as far as when we were watching it. I know.
Yeah, they kind of just all sat there. Nobody walked out. I was sure there were going to be some, but no, everybody stayed. Like, that was weird. I don't know what was going on there because there were a lot of people there. I mean, it wasn't a big theater or anything, but it was a lot. So,
we're not gonna. I don't want to touch too much on it because it's just a trailer, and we'll be talking about the movie when it comes out. But we did see the Beau is Afraid trailer on the big screen. Yeah. Very highly anticipating that, quite frankly, if I'm being honest. And again, we've talked about Ari Aster here and there. Hereditary is a movie I still like. I'd like to rewatch. Midsummer was a movie I did not really like. But just to see that trailer on the big screen and think, wow, this is going to play here, as opposed to just at some festival somewhere and, have to see it later on DVD
that I'm
something.
Expecting very much. Like if Ari Aster cannot convince me that he is not a fraud with this movie, then he never will, because it's like, all right, this is it. What are you going to do? Like, this is the big one. So
once known as Disappointment Boulevard, now known as Beau.
Well, I mean, it's a chronicle of one of the most successful entrepreneurs of all time,
which is not really at all what the
which
movie
I'm
looks
like. What was he on Shark Tank? Like what? I mean, that's what I'd like to see. Is Ari Aster on?
I know we're
doing something on Shark Tank.
We're about 2 months out from this movie, so again, we'll be talking about when it comes out again. But is it going to be this whole thing again? Just looking at it, and again, this isn't a criticism. This is just me trying to think about it. Where it's like these are his fantasies or his or like his. So he's this rich industrialist entrepreneur guy, and then these are his fantasies or like his real life meeting his fantasy life. I don't know. I have no clue. Like I don't know what it's going to be.
Or was that just a lie altogether?
Yeah, I don't know. Could be. I don't know. Yeah, so
it's clearly something. Very much something, whatever it is. I don't know.
Substantial.
But,
I mean, even if it's
Disappointment Boulevard next to Know Your Role.
I mean,
Boulevard.
Disappointment Boulevard. There's been people complaining about the title change. Who cares really about that?
Yeah.
But Disappointment Boulevard, almost like, I could see that on a poster, and then
Beau is Afraid.
Beau is Afraid is inherently like a question,
and there's
around that way. Like, why is Beau afraid?
3 or 4 different versions of the same character on a poster. And it's like.
But but I love titles like that where it almost makes you lean in. Like, don't you want to know why Beau is afraid? Or like,
I could figure it out probably.
Or like, why is Beau afraid? Come and find out. It's just
and like the whole moment in the trailer
it.
where it's like, I'm going to see my mom, and then it's like, oh, I'm coming, but like I have to go outside, and then there's like a mass riot going on, and
there's like people casually looking at like the AK-47s that they have.
Right.
It's just like, what is this?
I don't know.
Like,
Yeah. And then there's that moment that makes me laugh in the trailer every time. And then Nathan Lane's in the movie, which is like, and he looks like just like.
By the way, this is a very quick thing that I was going to lean over and say during the trailer, but forgot. Like, do you notice in that like house, it's got like this, like an American flag looking thing? It's like kind of almost weird right wing looking stuff, and it's like, imagine, I don't know if that's Nathan Lane's belongings.
Yes, it is.
But to think that it is,
but that moment
hilarious.
where he's like sitting at a table and looks over, and there's a screen door, and there's this big guy just standing there. It's like, what's funny about that is that's a very like Ari Aster moment, but at the same time looks so comedic.
Yeah,
that
right.
it makes me laugh. Because normally...
Well, his movies
it's
are
like-
actually very funny, as some people would have you believe.
Not really at all, but that was kind of a welcome moment of like the way the guy looks doesn't look at all imposing or scary. It literally just looks like a man standing there. So it's like that. I think is intentionally meant to be kind of funny. Like, oh, there's just somebody standing there.
And again, there's so many
like, you know,
visuals that are just thrown your way. Like one that I keep thinking about, and I'm like, have no clue. Obviously, of course, what the context it's in is. It looks like an auditorium.
Yeah.
And it's
like the ending of I'm thinking of ending things.
Yeah, and it's like the person on stage is like leaning forward or walking towards the people that are. There's just all these things that throws at you.
Maybe it's a real ending of Tar, kind of similar thing. Yeah.
But I mean, it's got already people looking at the trailer the last so many weeks have compared it to Charlie Kaufman's work, and so as you said, I'm thinking of ending things or Synecdoche, New York. It looks like it could be a version of. So
will it have as good of an ending as Synecdoche, New York?
We'll see.
Die.
But we'll see. So again, just want to briefly touch on that. We'll definitely be seeing that and talking about it when it comes out in April. So again, normally is the place where we would. This is the place where we would put clips or trailer for the movie, but trailers for the movies. But again, they're both silent films, so of course they were in a totally different paradigm back then. They didn't really make trailers in the same way. Certainly anything with sound or anything like that. So Cabiria from 1914. Levi, why don't you briefly tell us what Cabiria is about?
So Cabiria...
I love some clarity myself.
Right. I don't really know, to be honest with you. Is a 1914 Italian epic silent film, directed by Giovanni Pastroni and shot in Turin. Film is set in ancient Sicily, Carthage, and Cirta during the period of the Second Punic War, so about 218 to 202 BC. Follows a melodramatic main plot about an abducted little girl, Cabiria, and features an eruption of Mount Etna, heinous religious rituals in Carthage. I don't know that I would call them heinous. I don't remember anything being that bad, but other than just basic. Yeah. Oh, yeah, they did burn those children. I forgot about that. Never mind. That is awful. Pretty bad.
Well, give it over to Moloch.
So never mind. Just because it's hard to remember anything that happens in this movie. The Alpine Trek of Hannibal, Archimedes' defeat of the Roman fleet at the Siege of Syracuse, and Scipio maneuvering in North Africa. Let's see. So basically... Well, also, I'll say the historical background and characters in the story are taken from Livy's Ob Urbe Condita. In addition, the script of Cabiria was partially based on Gustave Flaubert's 1862 novel Salambo and Emilio Saligheri's 1908 novel Cartagine in Fiamme, which means Carthage in Flames. So it's
pulling from a lot of sources, right, pretty much. Yeah.
It's a lot of, like I said, the Second Punic War is what it's really focusing on of... kind of the Greeks versus the Romans at the time. The Wi-Fi is not working. But a lot of those kind of the stuff of the Roman Republic before the Empire, primarily, because the Empire didn't really start until the 1st century BC. But
so one of the reasons we chose this movie, again, neither one of us had seen this prior to watching it for this podcast, was because of the reputation that it had, it being kind of an early kind of silent epic.
Yeah, it says, apart from, or according to Martin Scorsese, in this work, Pastroni invented the epic movie and deserves credit for many of the innovations often attributed to D.W. Griffith and Cecil B. DeMille. Among those was the intensive use of a moving camera, thus freeing the feature-length narrative film from static gaze. I have some thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, it was more so than what had previously been done, but I think one of the criticisms we can have this movie involves maybe that idea. Yeah. But again, here in America, we especially know a lot about D.W. Griffith and Cecil B. DeMille, two of those names that were mentioned. Griffith especially gets a lot of credit for, obviously, the very controversial Birth of a Nation, which in many ways is, I think inarguably one of the most important films of all time in terms of not only all the film grammar that it invented and pioneered, but also its place within America, specifically manifestation of white supremacy and its perpetuation of many of the myths and ideas associated with the lost cause narrative of the Civil War, which was especially getting reheated and revamped in the teens in America.
Yeah.
And so, rightfully so, in America, we're like, well, Birth of a Nation invented this, invented that. Again, I've not seen a whole lot of really any Italian cinema of this era, of this particular era. So I think that
starts more or less with Italian neorealism
Yeah.
with Rossellini and De Sica. And,
So that kind of post World War II era is where
Yeah.
more so our understanding of
Right.
Italian cinema begins. But so this was an earlier version of that. And I do think, Scorsese has, a point, and being an Italian-American filmmaker, I'm sure he feels a certain solidarity with...
Well, because outside of America,
This.
what gets a lot of the study of the time is France,
Yes.
primarily Germany, and Russia, pretty
Yeah.
much. And the Russian being the least of those because it's more of a focus on Eisenstein's kind of
Yeah.
communistic Bolshevism cinema.
And obviously,
yeah.
Méliès was huge in France, and
Yeah.
France was on the precipice, I know too, of becoming what Hollywood became in the 20s, worldwide, globally. But then World War I, First World War happened,
And of course,
kind
with
put that off
Germany
track.
having Fritz Lang, G.W. Pabst, all that kind of pre-war, F.W. Murnau, all those kind of big directors of the time that were making these, mostly, I guess, seen now as like horror films and German expressionism. But yeah, so that kind of then leaves the Italians, which is kind of a strange place to go to, even because there aren't as many talked about. This is by far the biggest.
Another
though,
thing is
so-
too, I mean, specifically with this, is I've not really seen many movies from Europe made during World War I all that much, even less so.
1914, so it was literally right.
Yeah.
So it's probably pretty much made just before it happened.
And France also famously kind of switched sides during World War I as well.
Yeah,
so.
and Italy was...
I mean, I'm sorry, I said France. I meant Italy.
Yeah,
I'm
and
sorry.
Italy was one of the more destroyed countries, too. Had some very fierce... I mean, literally all of... A Farewell to Arms is in Italy, which is a little bit different from most. It was in France.
World War I narratives,
and,
yeah.
but it's either France or the Middle East. It's like there's never any in between, it seems like.
What did you think of this movie, taking it in all that context for it as a historical epic or a historical
It's kind of
drama?
exactly what I think most people think silent movies are, which is incredibly, flawed and I think misguided, is boring.
We don't say
And
that word
no,
very often
no,
with
I don't.
like movies.
And I think and here's what the problem is: it doesn't rest itself on its visuals enough to me. It's a lot about this person does this. It's very plot oriented.
now it does have moments, I'd say, that are visually
Yeah.
sophisticated. Like there are some effects with the volcano erupting.
Yeah,
I was
the
like,
Mount
oh wow,
Etna
this
stuff,
is actually
the-
impressive.
the
for
Moloch
this era.
set, which
Yeah.
there wasn't enough of. I mean, like I say, you see things like this later on in Intolerance and even The Birth of a Nation versions of these kind of things that were literally years later. But with this, it has so many intertitles, which is different. I haven't ever seen a movie with that many. There's some that barely have any, like some of Sternberg's work.
Well,
I
it's
felt
a whole
like
different
didn't,
genre, but we
you
can
know.
even think about with Steamboat Bill Jr. How minimal, by comparison,
Yep.
that is.
Yeah.
That's a 10 years later. So,
Right,
I mean,
and part of that is because of the lack of the close-up, which had... now, it's not to say D.W. Griffith created the close-up. Clearly, it was created before that. But his popularization of that with The Birth of a Nation and other movies that came right after this, clearly... the movie's lacking something.
Yeah.
Blocking.
Which was
and
literally
technically.
right
And
around the
that's-
corner.
And that's fine. I don't blame
Yeah.
the movie for that. Like,
Yeah.
there's nothing that I can. There's nothing I can do to blame that. That was just the film language of the time. But I feel like even like say the Russians were doing now what I remember of something like, these things. Well, that all came after that too, though. So I shouldn't say that because I was getting my years mixed up. But there were things that were brewing in other places where that was going to happen. And I feel like he's
famously
on to
with
something,
Eisenstein, was
yeah.
the editing of those
That was
movies.
in the
That
early
was
20s.
a pioneering
Yeah,
thing
because
around the
that
corner,
literally
too.
came right after the revolution.
But it's like you said, I mean, I feel like this movie fits into the stereotype of sometimes why people don't watch silent cinema. And again, it's weird to criticize this movie because, again, we're so far removed from the context of what film was in the teens that you want to kind of pull punches in certain regards with it, even though that inherently falls into that category that you said earlier, the bad B word, which is boring.
Yeah.
That there is just this staginess. And we talked about that watching it. There's that, a lot of early films of this era, the camera feels so further back because, again, in many ways they were trying to replicate what a theatrical experience would have been of seeing a play on a stage. And so there is this...
It probably draws a lot from opera, too.
Yeah, there is
that.
this
Yeah.
inherent remove, it feels, from the intimacy that you get into with the 20s.
Yeah.
And in general, I mean, I think there are some great movies made in the teens or even the 1900s. But for me, just personally, film became a more fine-tuned art by the 20s. I mean, and there is an inherent datedness as there will be a datedness of 2023 movies in the decades and centuries to come with any era of film. Naturally, that every era of film, movies are trying to. The movies that are really trying to push something forward, and I do think this movie is along those lines, although it doesn't quite push forward enough, is that it is scraping against whatever the conventions of the time are to try to make something more three-dimensional, yet this is a movie that does feel very kind of two-dimensional in that way because of that.
And like I say, part of it is that just like constant, this character does this character, and like, I'm not saying this to sound dumb either, but it's like, all these Roman and Carthaginian names that I'm like, I don't really know who any of these people are. And it's all so far away, and all the people are dressed up so much that I have trouble putting the names to the faces.
Yeah, right.
I'm like, I don't know who you're talking about, literally.
So there was a general lack of clarity
Yeah,
there.
so that's part of just a lesson of like, oh, so this is what movies used to be, was literally like,
I think it's a fine line for us as Americans watching this in 2023. There is a version of, I think, a typical Italian audience, if I had to guess, would have actually had a better grasp on these myths and these characters or these historical figures more so than we would now. But even so, I do think the movie does not differentiate those things enough.
Well,
so
I think
it's
I think the narrative is ambitious in the sense of taking these characters, because it is very much around these characters of Cabiria, Maciste, which was a man in blackface, which is its own whole other
which we
thing.
didn't really think about all that much.
I didn't really notice until most of the way through the movie. I was kind of looking, I was like, oh, that guy, because I can't see, it's too far away. Like,
It should also be said that while, again, I do agree there is genuine film grammar problems, there was also, like, the transfer of this movie was...
It's an older DVD.
It is an older
So it
movie,
was, like I said, Cabiria, Maciste, and then, Fulvius Axilla, who are kind of the main trio of characters of sorts. Cabiria is barely in the movie, though.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, okay, because she's kidnapped by the Carthaginians, and the rest of the movie is kind of those other two men who are spies for Rome trying to basically find her and get her back. And so that's interesting conceptually, to make a movie about people who are in the midst of this larger war, or it's showing how it's affecting the individuals, and that's something that's very ambitious, I say, of the time. That, I feel like, now I haven't seen The Birth of a Nation, which I feel like we need to rectify that soon, honestly, because...
Yeah, I've seen lots of clips from it, but not the whole thing.
And Intolerance, also,
I have seen
and
that.
Parts of the World, and all kinds of other movies of his. But that I feel like that would happen a lot more in the years to come after this, but that's always the historical epics I'm more interested in, is taking regular people rather than like, I want to see a movie about Winston Churchill. I mean, not that I wouldn't want to see a movie about Winston Churchill, but at the same time, I'm just not going to be interested in that. It's like, I like movies that are obviously, I'll say, about, that's why Titanic's great, because it's not about real people per se. It's about versions of,
or even about people, fictional characters manifesting class or ideas.
I shouldn't say real people. I mean, it's not about like famous real people. It's about actual people who didn't exist, but like say stand in for other things. So I think that's very ambitious for the movie to do that. But there's just so many things that happen in the movie that kind of just happen, and it's like, now Hannibal is over here, and it's like, did I ever see Hannibal?
To be fair,
I don't know.
also that could be what even that's what a decent amount of theater even was. At this time, so that was not even just a film problem. Exactly what films were, that could even be theater. Now there was great theater before this that clarified things. I mean, obviously there was Shakespeare existed centuries before this, but I think there would have been an appeal to an Italian audience of this, of seeing a sort of it's weird to use this word, but like a review of like, oh, this, and then this, and then this, and like, so depicting a lot of these historical moments or legendary moments on screen in a succession would have meant enough and a lot to audiences, I believe, in 1915. That would have seen this. Even what limited American audiences would have even seen something like this too.
It's funny. I was just looking on the plot summary, which is really long.
Randomly longer than you would, which speaks to some of our criticism, anyways.
But there's a part I forgot where it's like, oh yeah, by the way, Archimedes is here, and he has this sun ray or light ray that's going to burn people, and it's like I'd forgotten about that until I read that. I was like, oh yeah, so Archimedes appears. It's like there's so many things going on at a point where it's like I don't really know or care about any of it because I can't keep up. So yeah.
So again, it's I feel weird. I feel like I'm punching down with a movie like this because I don't really want to criticize it all that much because, again, we truly do love a lot of silent cinema, and again, especially I think arguably, like I said, film became a more refined art by the 20s in general. Film grammar was starting to develop. Not to say there couldn't be great things made during this era, but there is just some inherent. This is an idea of like a movie scraping up against the ceiling of what cinema was, while still also it could have done some things differently too.
Yeah,
and make itself better.
I think it's a thankless movie in its own way to just be. It's like it's the first epic. It's like that doesn't mean it is epic in its own way. I mean it is literally, but like that doesn't mean it's great just by that. So it's. And
I think another thing, too, that the epic in general on film learned over time, like any other genre, is that we have to feel that intimacy with the characters. We have to feel that emotional connection. And that when you throw too many, and this is true of even epics today that sometimes don't work, is that they do not create that tangible connection. One of the reasons Titanic, as we talked about many, many moons ago, and why we loved it, works is because it creates that intimacy between Jack and Rose in the midst of all these.
It has all the other
things,
characters. It can do both. I mean, and something like Heaven's Gate, which I kind of think of as the kind of preeminent, gaudy, big, massive epic
that threatens to even get lost itself. It
does,
times,
but it still maintains something while engaging in this sort of thing.
Especially by the end of that movie, you see the arc of what it is. I think really it sets in. It confirms ultimately.
Because it's like we get to see Maciste and Axilla do all these things, but then it's like, where was Cabiria the whole time? Was she there? I don't remember. Yeah, because she got older. And then she was a different actress.
I couldn't help but think, I've told this story before, with Cabiria's relationship to this movie was also thinking about another titular movie that features a questionable presence of a character in Tron.
Yeah.
I remember famously seeing that at UNCW's campus during one of the Hawk-Ins, which were these movie marathons. They probably still do, but they did some years ago. And Tron, literally the worst time to watch it. It was like midnight, 1 a.m, I don't even remember, and everybody's just like feels dead by that point. And so there's just these and that movie's like little bright lights and you're half awake and you're like, I'm not even totally comprehending what's going on. And famously there was like a moment in the movie where one of the characters says, Tron is dead, and it was just real quiet, and then somebody, a hero, shouted out in the audience, like, when did that happen? And what people were awake laughed, I remember. And I remember thinking, I don't even remember that. And again, it probably is a combination of I'm not fully awake and taking this in, but also like, wait, what? I don't, so I felt that way a little bit about Cabiria. I was just like, where is Cabiria here? Like, what is going on? Like, and a little bit of that lack of clarity.
We also need to say that we watched the majority of it on one night. Literally, both of us were too sleepy, and we're like, let's just finish this tomorrow. And
so take our criticisms with that grain of salt and understand that. But again, I mean, we were really giving it the benefit of the doubt, I feel like, and trying to, and again, understand and appreciate.
I'll rewatch it someday and pay more attention because I'm like, what was happening? I don't know. But there's just way too many intertitles.
So what does all this mean to you in terms of the context of film of this time?
Nothing. I mean, I want to, but I think the next important step is to watch The Birth of a Nation beginning to end, because that I think is going to be a telling.
I've seen enough of that to see an evolution. I mean, in film
and
style,
to see what. I think that'll be very telling about how this was improved upon.
I think another thing about Birth of a Nation too, which some people,
literally within a year.
Birth of a Nation had is one of the first movies too where people were like, "Oh, this work has a quote ideology, an ideological idea, and obviously one that's objectionable, but nonetheless has a point of view and in its own way a piece of propaganda that is like." Has a clearly
that movie's a little
ideology.
more almost about Reconstruction than it is about the Civil War, right? Mm-hmm. So I mean,
because it's basically saying in a roundabout way, it's the birth of a white supremacist nation that was made by the virtues of the horrors of the Civil War. Basically, is what it's trying to say. Which again, the lost cause narratives are
that it is championing
more so, in the teens.
Yeah, because I wondered that when I, first was hearing about that movie, I was like, why is that called that? And didn't really understand because kind of the whole point of the Civil War was this kind of, taking apart of that, and it's like, well, and so for a long time I didn't really understand that, and then I'm like, oh, okay, but.
So that's Cabiria.
Anyway.
Check it out if you get a chance. You ordered a DVD.
It was a Kino DVD from a long time ago. So from like the 2000s.
So again, if you're interested in silent cinema, but especially cinema of the teens, I would say check this out because it is in its own way not only a depiction of history, but also in and of itself a work of history.
If Dukes of Hazzard needs to be explained to you, though, I wouldn't check it out, as Bill Hicks would say.
Yeah.
But
so Steamboat Bill Jr. This is from 1928. I think this is going to be an easier movie to talk about because we both immediately liked it a lot more. This is, of course, Buster Keaton. This is one of his biggest movies.
Yeah.
Again, The General, which is also yet another lost cause-esque narrative in its own way, being about from the Confederate perspective, actually. Mm-hmm. And this movie actually has a little bit of Southern nature to it also that I thought was fascinating. Levi, why don't you tell us a little bit about what Steamboat Bill
Jr. 1928 silent comedy film starring Buster Keaton. Of course, he co-directed the film with Charles Reisner, who has kind of worked a lot, I think, with Charlie Chaplin, maybe. I think I saw that somewhere here. Let me look. Said they collaborated a lot together. I think directed maybe some of his movies, or helped at least, because the funny thing is Keaton and Chaplin both usually directed.
Yeah, it said he starred with A Dog's Life and The Kid. He was in those movies too.
Oh, okay. But anyway, basically it's I'm trying to find just a good summary of the movie. Basically, it's just about this guy named Steamboat Bill, William Canfield's the owner of a paddle boat called the Stonewall Jackson. And there's a newer one owned by this guy called the King, owned by J.J. King, not to be confused with B.B. King at all, who's basically taken over the kind of that area. I guess this is like on the Mississippi. I don't really know where it is. It doesn't say, but it's in the South somewhere. And basically, it's this kind of feud is going on between these two boat captains. Well, Steamboat Bill's son,
the titular Steamboat
Bill Jr. had went to college in Boston, it says, and he kind of comes back and is going to visit him mainly because he had never really met him, I don't think.
Yeah, it was like, here's your son.
Yeah, and that his mother had really wanted him to go there. Yeah. So when he goes, he kind of helps actually sort of run the ship. I thought it was actually the movie was going to be more of, he's actually captaining the boat. He doesn't really do that much. Yeah. But he falls in love with the daughter of the king guy named Kitty, and there's kind of a whole,
love
story that happens, and kind of a rivalry that happens between the two boat captains.
But also the idea that Steamboat Bill Sr. is like kind of semi-embarrassed by his son, like, you need to be tougher, you need to be more of a man, and like that he's more effete, and he's more like, you're not like tough like me, and so there is an element of that too, that he's a city boy, and he's got to learn the ways of what it's like to be a tough captain, to run the ship.
And And so just in general about Buster Keaton, I mean, I'd say I'm a Buster Keaton fan from what I've seen. I think that I overall like Chaplin maybe slightly more, but I think what Keaton gets a lot of the credit for being a lot more of a stunt performer, doing things that are just, quite frankly, totally insane. Like,
I mean, this movie features the very famous moment of the house falling all around him, and kind of that window basically, being the only where he's at, and so that's just an incredibly dangerous thing to do. I mean,
and there's the stuff of him on the train in the General, and that, of course, very famously had one of the most, had that really big train crash in the movie that was a big deal, and so I mean, there's a lot of
spectacle in his movies that he's a part of directly,
and so that's something that is a little different than Chaplin, who is a lot more interested in the small scale, but what's better about Chaplin is that his actual romances in his movies are really great.
And in general, his movies have more of a heart behind them. I think that's to me again over the years. I mentioned this last week. Chaplin was the more celebrated of the two, and Harold Lloyd always kind of holds a number 3 spot, and he's good too. But his movies are just, I feel like, a little more safe by comparison of either one of these other two. But that over time, Keaton has kind of become more so the cinephile's choice between the two. But again, and I like Keaton a lot, but I'll always hold more so by Chaplin, especially. I always thought a lot of him, but I recently for the first time watched The Great Dictator, and that is one of the most tonally complex movies I've ever seen in my life. That's, of course, a sound movie he made a little later on, about a decade after this. But he, that to kind of lampoon Hitler in the late 30s, early 40s, in the dangers of, obviously, the Second World War, was an incredibly dangerous, brave thing for him to do. And so he'll always, for me, among his other political qualities, obviously just be putting himself more out there on the line as opposed to Keaton, who literally was putting his body on the line. So there's a more so of a different thing with him that I respect as well.
Right.
The thing about Keaton is just he has that famous stone face, which everybody talks about oftentimes in terms of his visage. Didn't really hide behind the, the tramp archetype of character that Chaplin did. I mean, so... and just hit that stone face and kind of in these absurd situations, and him almost being the straight man in his own absurd comedies was kind of a strange place for him to be in these movies. But it's always one that's so memorable.
Yeah, because Chaplin, they say, in the tramp persona was very inherently comedic and making jokes and being very kind of clearly witty, where, like I say, is Keaton kind of more reacts to the things around him, which I think is interesting. That sounds like a criticism, but I actually think that's kind of interesting of his, how he does that. And this is only my third Keaton film. I'd seen The Cameraman, which
I don't know if I've
has
seen
always
that.
had a very particular place in my mind because Dr. Hannah Frank, who I had very briefly at UNCW when I was in my one kind of major film class, that was the last movie she showed us before she passed away. Later that week, she got sick with something. I can't remember what it was. It was like a viral infection of some sort, and passed away, and it was very sad for everybody. But that was the last movie we saw with her. We had only seen that in Rear Window. But that's a movie I always remember as being part of that in my mind. But it was a really good movie. And then I've seen The General, which I think is his best movie, and everybody kind of says that I've seen.
Sherlock Holmes Jr. is also really good.
He's like Junior. It's like he's like Chris Elliott naming every episode of Get a Life something 1000 or whatever. But that has some really funny stuff. One of the funniest jokes in any silent movie I've ever seen is just very simple in The Cameraman, where he's literally a cameraman for a newsreels or whatever, and there's this big fight that happens, this gang war in Chinatown that happens, and there's these two men they're either like have guns and they're like trying to shoot each other but fighting, or they have knives and they're grappling and they're fall on the ground, and he just turns and like starts filming it, and like they're doing that, and then he's just literally filming what's happening, which is just one of the simplest but funniest jokes. I remember everybody was laughing at that real hard when we saw that, but yeah, in this, I really liked all the stuff at the end. The whole climax with the windstorm was really funny.
Yeah, and I honestly was wondering how they even did that, too. I mean, they just had massive wind machines? I don't even know how they would
because it's real, clearly. I mean, but my favorite part's where he literally, like, the whole house is falling down. He literally goes and jumps back in his bed, and, and then the bed moves with the wind, you know. I mean, it's stuff like that I think we remember most from silent comedy, and stuff that even influenced, strangely, stuff like Benny Hill and stuff later on of this very, like, madcap physical comedy. Like I say, Chaplin's didn't necessarily do that. It was kind of a different type. But overall, this movie was good. I think that I could have used a little more of, obviously, some actual genuineness to it.
Yeah.
Like what Chaplin's movies were, but like I say, they're kind of two different types of things.
Yeah.
So.
And it's good.
I have no idea. I haven't seen any Harold Lloyd movies. I know you've seen some, and I don't know what his whole deal is as far as that goes, of where he is on that spectrum. But
and this sounds like such a diminishment of him, and I don't mean it to be. I mean, when you watch Keaton and Chaplin movies, they come at it from different angles, but you feel like there's this genuine art that's being made, and whether it be through physicality or through, like, the juxtapositions of Chaplin's movies between, like, his character and, like, you know, some of his movies are about class in a roundabout way, too. You just feel like something genuine's really happened. And, again, this is not that much of a criticism of Harold Lloyd, but you watch his movies, what I've seen, Safety Last and
The Freshman.
Yeah. And they feel like, oh, these are good comedy. These are good little comedies for their day. I mean, and again, they're well made. I wouldn't diminish their style the least bit, but they just feel like more conventional, fine enough, straightforward movies. Which again isn't really a criticism; is just to say that, you know, he's clearly the third wheel in these silent film comedy divides. And to your point, I think, you know, what we remember of silent film, I think one of the reasons these movies endure is because these are among the most accessible silent films that continue to exist, that people of an average stripe who might not be a cinephile are more apt to watch, you know, because
and was honestly popularized by people like Bogdanovich, who was a big Buster Keaton fan. And
but when you talk about Eisenstein or some of the European movies that were being made at this time, you know, your average person's probably not going to be all that interested in watching any of that. But this is something that has a certain immediacy. It makes you laugh. And that always is going to be something that people return to in a selling point. Which is the movie that
has the whole part where he's running down the hill and little rocks hit other rocks, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger. I know that's like a famous scene.
Oh, yeah.
Because Bogdanovich talked about that when he was on Dick Cavett that one time. And there's some parts in that are straight up like, how are you alive? I don't know. Like, it's
the whole set piece in The General that's so famous is like where he's one of them where he's on the front of the train
and
he's like,
getting off
hitting
to
the
railroad ties.
And there's a lot of moments of that you're like, oh my gosh, how could you even do that? How many takes went into this? I think he actually suffered some pretty serious injuries making some of his movies too. Seven Chances is the name of
when that come out, 1925.
25,
Okay.
And again, I think
if you haven't seen that scene from Seven Chances of Buster Keaton in the rock slide, just go find that, because it's literally like it goes on and on and on and just gets more and more ridiculous, like, you know. But yeah, and I think, like I say, I think that's kind of when we think about like I was saying, you were saying silent movies. I think we think about this kind of cultivation of the form. And I think normally we talk about the sci-fi or the horror movies because of what they can do for special effects, or
Metropolis,
also, real quickly to go off on that, you mentioned Metropolis. I literally saw there was a shot from that's famous of a person's eye.
Yeah.
That was a big inspiration for parts in Blade Runner also. I was literally looking at that. I was like, that literally looks like it was shot yesterday in black and white. Like, it's so good looking.
Well, Fritz Lang was also, to talk about him ever so briefly,
Yeah.
he was a genuine true blue artist whose work extended into the sound era.
But I was just looking at that
great
specifically and was like, wow, that just literally looks like somebody took a black and white photograph of an eye yesterday and showed it to me now. Like, but it was literally about 100 years ago.
Right.
But that with these comedies like this, if you see, like I say, that it was Steamboat Bill Jr., the whole, we literally don't know what they did at the end of the movie to accomplish all that. But it's like, wow, and that's a lot to do for a comedy. Like, now they wouldn't do that for a comedy movie necessarily, or it would be easier to do something like that. But yeah, to do that then was just, that's just what you're going to do because we're making a movie and we're going to put all the money we want into this. And so, yeah.
And the fact that obviously Keaton and Chaplin were especially both huge bankable stars, there is a feeling of, especially a movie like City Lights, which is quite literally one of the greatest films ever made of any era, that it just feels so complete. It feels like, that this makes you laugh, it makes you cry, it has some set pieces in it, it feels, and that movie is a special movie in a lot of ways, City Lights, because it comes at the very conclusion. It's really the last serious silent film, I would say, made, because by 31 already sound was preeminent. And so that was, specifically about Chaplin, that was kind of his last formal big stamp on the silent film. And of course, Modern Times came about and was a little bit of a hybrid before The Great Dictator. But again, I think just one of the reasons these movies continue to exist is just because of, with Keaton and Chaplin, you're seeing the birth of the modern movie star in terms of, and obviously movie stars have changed a lot over those years, but in terms of, in that moment, you see that they're recognizable. They make a certain kind of movie, and fans of theirs obviously wanted to see whatever the newest version of the Keaton movie or the Chaplin movie was. And so Steamboat Bill Jr., while not thematically all that deep, is the firmest, newest expression of its moment of what Keaton was willing and able to do in terms of with the form of silent cinema and with that. And again, that silent cinema was in its kind of in its descent by this point in terms of being replaced by sound films, even by obviously 28 was a year after The Jazz Singer. So another question, and just to maybe end this too, of thinking about these movies is a weird question to ask. It almost sounds like an oxymoron. What is the future of silent cinema in terms of it? Can a silent movie be made today without the tricks or the conceit of something, like The Artist, it's a throwback? Because I've thought about this here and there, that actually it would be interesting to see a silent film made today without being a gimmicky kind of thing.
Yes.
I think Barry Jenkins is the director who always jumps to mind for me when I think about, I'd love to see Barry Jenkins make a modern silent film. What I mean by modern is it's even set in today. It might even have a soundtrack and music to it, but it kind of lacks the dialogue, because I think a lot of people would agree his close-ups in his movies, which again by the mid to late 20s the close-up was becoming more and more of a thing, are so memorable in modern cinema that I think he could be somebody who takes on making a silent film.
There are a lot of examples of some of these things that I'm thinking of. I know in the 1960s there was a Japanese film called The Naked Island, which was famous for, I think, having no dialogue whatsoever. It says almost none.
Yeah.
Also, All Is Lost came out some years ago now. The
Robert Redford thing?
Robert Redford movie is directed by, what's his name? Guy that made Most Violent
J.C.
Year.
Chandor.
J.C. Chandor. But the difference, and even things like these big spectacle films like from Christopher Nolan.
Yeah, we've talked about that recently.
But usually the difference, though, even in movies like that, is you still have this soundscape,
the design,
and even David Lynch's movies, which have dialogue,
yeah,
are like that. So to do that, like I say, I think more the people. I think that the impulse of people now would be to do something like that and have, there's still a lot of noise, but yeah, I mean,
I think all those examples you just named, though, are clear that the influence of silent cinema lives on, obviously. And it's something that's always, even in film's earliest stages, still is a huge influence.
Right. But sadly, that is not of any interest to Hollywood whatsoever right now.
Unless, even something like The Artist, which got a lot of flack back when it came out, and I thought it was okay, although I do agree with many of the criticisms of the movie, that it treated it as a joke almost, or as a trick. Again, I would like to see this seriously almost explored too, by a more modern director. But again, I think another reason we picked both of these movies are they kind of, you can see the evolution of film even within 10, 15 years.
Right.
Because again, as we said, Steamboat Bill Jr., one of the reasons it so connects, and again, we're skipping nationalities and also 10, 15 years in film time, which at this moment was light years difference, was the ability to have a little bit more of a mobile camera, which again was partially there in Cabiria, but not exactly.
It moved.
And also the close-up.
Okay,
is,
it moved,
more so.
but there were no close-up. I didn't get a sense of who any of the people were. Yeah. These movies, among many other differences they have, you can just see the evolution of silent cinema moving, film grammar changing and evolving over time. Any other last-minute thoughts about either one of these movies, or what they mean together, or side by side? I think other than just showing literally the difference, and just also in confidence. I mean, which is natural, but just the confidence of Buster Keaton, especially compared to Pastrone, which it doesn't really mean anything, but it's just something I thought about
even
too.
More so, more than film grammar, just the idea of films becoming a little bit even more of a fine-tuned product. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Right. And even by Steamboat Bill Jr., there's this idea that films have more of a shape and a design.
That was a funny ending to that, where he literally went and got a priest out of the steamboat that crashed, and we got to get married. I meant to say literally, it's I think we could leave it on this, and what makes silent cinema so great in a lot of ways is I think that the final image of Cabiria is one of the greatest final images of a movie I've ever seen.
Really good,
and it's it comes at the end of this movie though. It's kind of okay, but so. Literally, that honestly, if you're on the fence about ever watching Cabiria, just literally watch all of it just for that, if nothing else.
I think we would obviously both wholeheartedly recommend checking out Steamboat Bill Jr.
Oh, yeah. And all of Keaton's work in general, I mean, which I need to watch way more of anyway, I think it's worthwhile to watch both of them, and we didn't talk very long about either, but, that's by nature of them also being quite literally having nothing to say because they're silent.
Right. So we tried to give some voice and commentary to both of them. But next week, both of these movies, they not only talk, they sing in their own ways.
Well, one of them more than the other. But a lot of sound going on.
So awesome. Jeff, what have we got next week?
Stay tuned for scenes from our next episode.
Shit, Albert. Listen, man, what you doing coming in for, man? You crazy? This ain't Disneyland, man.
You were supposed to get back to me last night. Where the fuck you been?
I couldn't break free, Vincent,
Let's violate his ass right now. I do for you. You don't do for me. Is that it?
Vincent, man, I swear, I was out all night, man. I'm hitting like one of them flamingo matador guys, man.
That's got nothing to do with me.
I was cutting it real smooth. I'm generating leads and shit for you. I'm a dancer, man, you know.
Bullshit. I paged your ass all day. I can't stand fucking page. You're a speed freak, jacking methamphetamine again.
Oh, man, where's your empathy, brother? It's a substance abuse
Empathy was yesterday. Today, you're wasting my motherfucking time.
Vincent, man,
Did you fall in love? Come on. Did you fall in love last night? You went off somewhere?
Vincent.
Just tell me that. I'll settle for it. You know what I mean? I'll buy that.
Vincent.
Give me all you got!
Vincent.
Give me all you got!
I swear, man, my brother Richard's gonna talk to you. Man.
I heard Richard.
He gonna talk to you.
Richard?
He gonna meet you, man, I swear, tonight.
He's not here, is he?
No, he gonna meet you tonight.
Tonight? What happened to right now?
I implored him because I knew you was coming this AM.
That's a bunch of bullshit.
No, I swear, he said no. Because he in Phoenix.
By the time I get to
man,
Phoenix,
I swear, man, tonight's the
he'll
best
be
I can do for you.
rising. He'll probably leave a note right on the door.
Tonight's the best I can do for you, man. You know? He'll meet you at BJ's on Alvarado at 2 a.m. Be there.
You be there too.
Vince, I can't be there, man. I got things to do, Vince. I got things to do. I got places to be. I got
Be there. Don't waste my motherfucking time!
Hey, Max. What are you doing?
Stuff?
Getting ready for the big move kind of stuff?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry we sprung this on you, Max, but it was sort of sprung on me the same way.
Uh-huh.
Okay. What if I didn't take the job? What then? A home, the food we eat, the clothes you wear? That takes a lot of money.
I just can't see why we can't stay.
Well, sometimes in life, you gotta do things that you don't want to do because other people who have power over you tell you to do them.
No, Dad. I mean, if you rise up and show that you're not afraid, those people will no longer have control over your life.
What have you done with Max? Who are you? Really? Good night, kiddo.
See ya.
When I get to Phoenix. Don't waste my money time!
I mean, we were talking, so of course that's Heat.
All right, so
from 1995 and Max Keeble's big move.
Yes.
From 2001.
Yeah. Now, I want to go ahead and say, first of all, that we're doing Heat. We are in Heat, literally, for Heat.
Yeah.
I want to go ahead and say, first of all, that the Michael Mann fan club on
Have we
Film
done a
Twitter,
Michael Mann movie
no,
in any
we haven't,
way here?
I
don't think so.
Is really annoying. I want you all to know that. We are both annoyed by that.
We both like Michael Mann.
We both like Michael Mann. In fact, his like my favorite and maybe his best movie is probably The Last of the Mohicans, which for a long time was my least favorite. But shame on me.
Yeah.
It's
not
crazy
that
not to be
movie
confused
also,
with Lean on Pete.
It also is crazy that movie,
or The Adventures of Pete and
feels
Pete.
like it takes place in a real world with three-dimensional characters. Also, though,
he is like action is the juice.
Yeah,
and like you have David Strathairn, but you don't blank and use him because isn't he in that? No. I'm sorry. The guy at the beginning that's the Jurassic Park lawyer.
Oh,
I was thinking, never mind. But still, you have that guy,
there's literally
and you don't use him.
Literally a second, like, wait a minute, is David Strathairn in Heat?
Never mind. I got too excited.
If only.
Has John Voight. You can't have David Strathairn.
With that hair.
Tom Noonan. You got Tom Noonan, who I like. Don't get me wrong. But I mean, he is
One
literally...
of the most sad, pathetic performances of all time, by the way, is him in Synecdoche, New York.
Who, Tom Noonan?
Yeah.
Die.
Yeah.
But
Heat how many times are we going to refer to that?
Yeah, I don't know.
Heat, love it.
Love it. I mean, it's one of the most famous, beloved movies ever at this point, especially of modern movies. It's kind of everything that you want a crime drama action movie to be. Because it
lives up to the hype of being the first collaboration between Pacino and De Niro.
And it has the very big, heist sequence, which is, another level of action filmmaking. Is totally great. But still, a lot of movies, though, would have that, and then you'd say, it's only good for that. They would talk about it like they talk about Bullet with the car chase, and they'd say, whatever, the rest of it. But the whole movie is in itself a memorable, engrossing crime. It calls itself a crime saga, which literally
I think is remarkable for how quote simple the story is.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a very quote simple story, but it's actually got some serious thematic things going on, and also just, of course, it's just to get poetic about it here. Mm-hmm. It's the definition of what Hollywood movies, and I use that term specifically, Hollywood movies should aspire to in terms of titanic, towering lead performances. filled with so many great character actors everywhere you look. I mean, the cast is, truly a marvel in terms of, you got the two leads at the top, but then the further you look down, it's just got every really great character actor that you would want to see in a movie like this.
Which we will say is one of our criticisms of the movie, is that it either should have been A, longer, or B, shorter, because you have the stuff with Natalie Portman in the movie, which I don't want to discount because I think is interesting potentially, but is a really big question mark of and I'm kind of just like, I don't really know what's going on here. I don't really care. We got a serial killer
subplot, by the way.
Then you have the Waingro serial killer subplot. Like, that is the most and we'll talk about all this next week, but that is literally the most random thing of all time, is like, oh, Waingro's a serial killer. Not that I disbelieve that he would be.
In the midst of everything else,
he's somebody who clearly has biker speed in his veins, like, all the time.
In the midst of, like, subplots that involve criminal, like working in a diner and he can't get any other work.
And then all the
in
Dennis
the context
Haysbert
of
stuff,
books about metals,
right?
In the terms of
hey,
like,
you know where I can get a loaf of bread around here?
In the terms of like your ex-wife, are they officially divorced or separated? Pacino and his wife.
No, they're together, but it's not, the question of whether they will
like
stay
that.
Because
her mistress
Xander
of
Berkeley,
I was going to say, her mistress of a husband watching his television set. I mean.
My effing television set.
And I think that, and also another thing about Heat, and don't worry, Max Keeble's big move fans, we're going to be getting to it here in a second.
Baby, don't
worry, Max Keeble's big move fans, we're going to be there for you in a second.
One of my other favorite moments, by the way, is at the beginning after the first the armored car robbery, and they're in the diner, and Waingro had shot and killed those. They basically had to kill all the cops because he shot one of them, the guy that couldn't hear him or whatever. And that he's like, y'all want a piece of pie? And they're literally like, we are literally going to take you outside and kill you right now. Like, but he's like, just the insanity of somebody like that. It's like all that happens, and he's like, you want a piece of pie? Like, no one wants a piece of pie, Waingro. Thank you.
As far as talking a little bit about Michael Mann's cinema itself, this is kind of the moment where he was starting. This is like the most digitized film, one of the most digitized movies shot on film I've ever seen, because obviously the 2000s, his cinema from
with
some really good movies, by the way, like Collateral and Miami Vice, which is
Public Enemies.
God. But obviously in those movies he went clearly in a more digital direction. This is like him clearly kind of getting a little lost in that on film.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Because you think about how green and lush Last of the Mohicans looks. That's obviously the geography dictates the styles of these movies, but there is, and I think it fits for this. That like look. I mean, and in many ways, it's an evolution of what Thief was. 10 years before this. But in terms of this cool, like, you almost feel like, I don't want to use the whole cliche of like the city's a character, but like. I think it's way more deep and dense than that. It's like this, the city and the soullessness of the architecture, when its own way has a sort of a somber beauty to it, is a geography in which these characters who are themselves becoming kind of more soulless and kind of more ghosts in this structure. I mean, it fits this. But
fits,
like,
and especially when you have people like John Voight with his like mullet hair, talking on cell phones, and you have like Henry Rollins being like William Fichtner's bodyguard, and it's like, all these weird. It fits, like you said, it not only fits the meaning of the movie, it literally fits the mise-en-scene of the people who move around in this world. Literally, it feels lived in. It feels as lived in as something so almost colorless and tasteless and soulless can feel. It reminds me a lot of Terminator 2 in its own way, of the way it literally looks.
I mean, obviously they're both in L.A.
Right, and so that really fit that time period, I think, of looking like that.
And it's one of the perfect, last thing I'll say about it before we move on to, again, Max Keeble's big move is...
a big football move.
One insane move.
One insane move.
That's, I think... But, okay. Let's
all right.
Side table that for 2 seconds.
Yes.
It's
we have a lot more to say about these in the preview than we did about the other two movies that we did today.
That with Heat, it's the perfect example of how dated it in a loving way it looks of the 90s, but also like this was this is what hyper modernity looked like in the 90s too. And so it's like it's the perfect divide between this looks super dated now, but this is what modernity looked like then in terms of the most urban visual palette as far as this is very modern and contemporary.
I mean, are these guys something or are they something?
Yeah,
you know. And also, before we move on, Danny Trejo's whole character in this movie.
That's the thing. I feel like you open a door and it's like there's 5 or 6 performances fall out that you forgot about, like
that. And so my favorite, just to preview that, I want to talk a lot about this next week. My favorite scene is where he's like jogging in his like tracksuit and has to make a phone call, and he's like, "I'm sorry, brother, they got me," or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, "We got you." Like, but anyway, we'll talk more about that next week. But
Max Keeble's big move. Now, again, I think one of the whole term one insane move for us has really taken off over the last
from Avatar, of course, as we know.
We're really rewatching Avatar before we saw the new one. Max Keeble's big move in terms of just letting you know what that is.
So looking at the poster, first of all, his world, his rules, Max Keeble's big move. Like, so is the movie His World, His Rules Max, or is it Max Keeble's? I don't know.
Now, you have not seen this?
Oh, no, I did years ago.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. But it's been probably, when did this come out?
2001.
Oh, yeah, it's been like 20 years. Yeah.
October of 2001.
Yeah.
Just to give you an idea what this is about, the plot follows the eponymous Max. I love whoever wrote this Wikipedia says, we got to throw that in.
Well, because it says it's so big on the poster, like I didn't know that.
And his friends who begin going to junior high school. So maybe as a middle school teacher, you can give us some notes about some of the behavior
I'll think about that.
School in this movie. Only to learn Max and his friends will soon move elsewhere. Oh, and his family, excuse me. Max and his family soon moves elsewhere. Max resolves to get even with those who bully him and his friends before he leaves, since he will not...
Is Josh Peck in this?
Yes.
Okay,
he will
that's
not
what I thought.
remain long enough to face discipline for anything.
Yeah, no, that's literally how some of my kids think.
That reminds me of Christopher Lee, famously as a member of the basically the British Secrets,
the OSS.
The OSS.
Yeah.
Well, the OSS was American.
No, that's right. The
MI5 or MI6.
Yeah, right.
Exactly what
I'm
he was.
sorry.
In the event that Germany, were to conquer Britain and Europe, was to quote burn Europe to the ground, they were basically going to be the last stop guerrilla warfare that would have fought the Nazis. Something about that reminds me of this. Just like no consequences.
Yeah,
for
it's
anything.
like we're going to dress up as mascots and ruin everything.
Yeah, Josh Peck is in this.
Right, that's what I thought.
As Robe, the robe-wearing friend of Max.
What?
Because that's his
Are
name.
They smoking crack? What are they talking about?
I know the villain of the movie is Larry
that
Miller.
guy. Oh my God,
Principal
He's
Elliot.
Great.
Listen to his name. Principal Elliot T. Jindrake, the corrupt principal.
Jindrake.
And also Jamie Kennedy is the evil ice cream man, which is clearly like the
Snowplow Man.
Snowplow Man.
Yeah. Which Josh Peck was
Elliott.
in that, of course. No. Jamie Kennedy. Are you a big fan of Jamie Kennedy?
Not really. I mean,
Scream. I mean,
well, he Scream, but then also
he did Scream for
Malibu's Most Wanted. Have you ever seen any of that?
No.
He's like a white rapper in that. Very embarrassing.
God.
Son of the Mask. He's also the lead in.
But I mean, he screams for ice cream.
An unnamed ice cream vendor who plans revenge on Max ever since the latter found a bug in a snow cone and his mother called the health department on him. All of that just for that character, and then you look at all these other ones, like, okay.
So first of all, it's like, I'm going to get revenge on this child for pointing out my obviously disgusting life. Robert
Carradine, a member of the Carradine family, is Donald Keeble, Max's father. Cameos. Tony Hawk as himself.
What?
Lil Romeo as himself.
Lil Romeo.
And Marcus Hobson as Pizza Parlor Guy. This is and I say this with love, a very 2001 movie.
This is a Disney movie, right?
Yeah, it was Disney,
officially. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I remember seeing it. I think the way that I used to see it when we used to watch it some, because I think you watched it a little more than I did, it was taped on VHS from like the Disney Channel at the time. I think so, maybe. But yeah, this is a movie that we laugh about here and there. Of just, first of all, the title, Max Keeble's big move.
Well, I love that. He's moving and he's going to make some big.
He's going to make one insane move. Yeah, I think he makes more than one. But now I want to say we watched some of this movie again on TV around Thanksgiving of 2019. I remember.
Wow, you remember that?
I remember this because that was the day that the new. You're gonna laugh at this. I'm bringing this up. The Jonathan Glazer movie, The Fall, came out. And I remember watching that on my laptop and being like, "Wow!" And then coming in the room and that was on TV, and then watching that, and I was like,
just
"Wow!"
So you know, looking at the plot description here, also says talking about the Jen Drake is dismissed. Spoiler alert, and facing criminal charges for, quote, manipulating the school budget, and that is all linked under the idea of embezzlement. The Wikipedia page. It's just like, I mean, again, this movie dumb as hell.
We honestly, it would have made more sense for us to have done this with Dunstan checks in, but
or the commentary we did of
Snow Day,
or
Sea Spot Run.
Yeah, you know,
but as a teacher at my school encouraged a child this week, never let them know your next move. So I think that's why we're going with Heat and.
I mean, they're both about insane moves.
Yes,
you know, so both great products of their time. I would say, obviously, Heat more strongly than that.
So we're looking forward to that.
Yep,
and that'll be our 70th
episode. That's
going to be one insane movie.
Yeah, I was going to say that's Kyle, but I was like, no, that's Levi. That's Levi. This is where you say this is Kyle, and that's Kyle.
And that's Kyle?
Well, no,
Eugene Pallet.
Feedback.
Right.
We watched Lady Eve last night. Again, rewatched it again.
Yeah. I need to get going now.
Yeah, Eugene Pallet. Oh, is that him? His ghost?
Here I am.
Maybe tune in. Maybe tune in next week.
I'm a big Heat fan. Feedback fan.
This is Kyle.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
He just jumped out the window.
Oh.
Right. Yeah.
Well, he floated away. He's a ghost.
Yes.
Right? This is Kyle.
Anyway, this is Levi.
Take care. God bless.
One insane move just happened.
Thank you very much. So nice. Goodbye.